So, my name is Keith, and I'm super excited to be here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my life's journey, which hopefully you will come to find beauty in non-straight paths, let's say, by the end of this, right? I'll share my journey, and my journey is through a very particular lens that we call haptic design. Now, we'll get through all of that stuff in case you don't know what haptics is, no worries. I got that planned as a slide. But just to kind of jump right in, right? We all get asked this question, or I don't know, I got asked this question. I assume that we all got asked this question at some point. What do you want to be when you grow up? Right now, 6-year-old me had a very, very clear answer. A Japanese sword maker, right? Now, I'm not here to talk about Japanese swords today. I'm here to talk about haptics. And so I got an introduction, a way of bringing this in. I wrote a rap about it. And I'm not sure if you can hear it back there so well. So I'm gonna tilt this down and, can y'all hear okay?
We have a vision. We have a vision. We have a vision. We have a vision.
We have a vision of a world that doesn't need vision. Elevate and touch to the level of sight and sound, and that's our mission. Research spending. Today is access tomorrow for all of our children. Look at the spending over the last 100 years, spread over each of the 5 of our senses. Seeing is believing, yep. Most went the vision, second went the sound, which is pretty far distant. For 100 years, money only spent on 2 senses. Isn't that senseless? That is just senseless. Here's my 2 cents, and vision is king and touch is in prison. Patriarch of all the senses is sight. Who really made that decision? Who the F made that decision? No one with limited vision, none of the 285 million, and wasn't hearing the 460 million folks with limited hearing. What? Digital. So sight and sound driven, that it left like a billion on the wrong side of a digital divide with virtually no pot to piss in. The future is touch, that's our mission. WearWorks is haptics, touch with the weight and intention, dramatically making a difference. You need to listen. So when I first came up with this idea, right, I ran it past my friend who's in the video, Marquise Price. He's a 2-time blind Paralympian. You can tell he's a big diesel guy. And I was like, want to make sure I didn't get canceled from the blind community. He said it was so dope that he produced the track. So this is his beat. Haptics so open-ended, new beginnings. It's like no rules are written. You can do anything if you just have a vision. Pun intended. So look to prior knowledge and few restrictions. So much to learn, it's like my new addiction. The real world, Dr. Strange adding a new dimension to the human existence. Touch new kids on the block, more like a new addition. It might seem a bit distant, but in 10 years, every device built will have haptics already embedded in it. This is my mission. I'm a haptician, a tactician of touch. Bruce Lee's 1-inch punch. One tap and you'll feel the difference. Been standing for 9 years in haptics, grinding relentless. Made history, helping a blind runner finish the New York Marathon without sighted assistance. We touched down on a touchdown. Now bear witness, right? And so the idea was this.
We have a vision.
No one's gonna read my white papers, right? And so how do we get this idea of haptics to the public so that more people could be inspired to do cool stuff with it like I was? So how'd you get in this? Saw real life and fiction. Saw The Matrix 1,000 times, saw my future in vision. Building a suit to download and learn Kung Fu, that was my entrance. Then we made it a business, subtracted complexity, then added and making a difference. The recipe to build an industry that will be valued in trillions. Tribe I'm trying to find, my elders foretold that it takes a village. My haptic signals in the sky, come and find me if you feel it. Thank you. So that was haptics. We have a vision. It's available on SoundCloud, and if you grab this QR code, you can feel free to listen in. Now this QR code will pop up as a bunch of links from content that's here, so you can grab it at any point in time that you might be interested, right? So now, who am I? I am Keith Kirkland. I am trained educationally as a mechanical engineer. Then after 6 months, decided I didn't want to do that anymore and became a handbag and shoe designer. Went to FIT and then worked in the industry for a while and was like, wow, I love my work, but we're kind of polluting the world. And then I went back to school again for industrial design, this time a master's degree. And then Pratt showed up and was like, hey, we invented this brand new program that you get to be the guinea pig of called Global Innovation Design. And you'll go and study 6 months in Keio University. And then you'll spend another 6 months studying at the Royal College of Art and Imperial College in London. Keio's in Tokyo. And then you come home. When I came home, I was a designer. So I thought, right? And so what is a designer, really, right? Now Buckminster Fuller, he's one of the greats in our industry. He says a designer is an emerging synthesis of artist, inventor, mechanic, objective economist, and evolutionary strategist. I agree. It's a lot, right? And so, starting from the beginning, what does haptic mean? Haptic means of or relating to the sense of touch. Like optic is for eyes, haptic is for skin. And my mission is to build a world where designing for the skin is as affordable, approachable, and accessible as designing for sight and sound, right? Now here's me at 33, had a lot more hair. And it was the first time I heard the word haptic in my life. Life, right? Think on that for a second. Life, I've never heard this word before. And now I'm standing up here as a haptic expert, right? All that was from this point of view. And when I wrote that song, I was trying to figure out how do I introduce this concept, because I was in the third year of my third degree program from 6 institutions when I first heard the word haptic. And then I changed my career. How many people would do that, right? So how do we get pipelines, talent in a pipeline early? And that was a big part of this conversation. And so I was invited to perform this at South by Southwest. This was the first rap I've ever written. South by Southwest was the first time I ever performed this rap in public. It was in front of 6,000 people. And it was at a music conference. I was scared crapless, but it was a beautiful experience, right? And now you look at our cousins, right? The visual tech industry, right? Basically, like the greatest minds of all of human history spent most of their lives designing visual-based technology, right? I mean, this is thousands and thousands of years of iteration and evolution, right? And it shows. Where does it show? It shows because I can get a VR headset, which didn't exist for the better part 10 years ago, for almost 3 times less than I can get a Braille typewriter. Why? Because we cared to make VR headsets cheaper. That's why. It's the only reason why, right? And so when we look at this, touch is a language. Just like those visual pieces, we need to build the technology. And so these are some of the great, amazing books in the space. These are like our Bibles. We don't have a lot of books in our world, so these are gems right here. So I know rap isn't everyone's first language, right? So we have a vision of a world that doesn't need vision. Elevating touch to the level of sight and sound, and that's our mission. Research spending. 2 days access tomorrow for all of our children. Look at the spending. Over the last 100 years, spread over each of the 5 of our senses, right? And you see where the technology exists, and right? We all have screens in our pocket. I have a screen in my pocket that can fold in half, right? So my journey into this language started where so many great ideas do. In a dark movie theater in 1999, I saw The Matrix, and I was absolutely blown away. Now, if you don't know what The Matrix is, shame on you. It's basically a post-apocalyptic theater that's just talking about where we are right now. AI takes over, and we didn't learn from that lesson 20 years ago, and so hopefully we figure it out before. But anyway, it's a great movie. visual effects are amazing, the philosophy is fantastic, right? So I studied a lot. I went to Rutgers, I went to FIT, I went to Pratt, I went to Keithius University. But the question never left me. This idea of movement learning, how is it possible? Can we download Kung Fu, right? I mean, I saw Back to the Future 2 in 1985, and it took us about 25 years to get a hoverboard, right? 25 years after the Matrix, and we still can't download Kung Fu, right? And so my thesis was my inspiration. I used to be able to move like this, and then a bunch of injuries, and now I'm on one of these every now and again, right? Ability is an interesting experience. So I was trying to figure out, how do I learn movement in a more safe way? And this is where I get to downloading Kung Fu, right? So I spent my thesis working on this idea. It was a punching sleeve. Now, if you've ever been to a carnival and like grab the big hammer and then like slam the hammer on the thing, bow, right? And then do, 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 do. That's what I was trying to build, but like a haptic thing that you know, the lights are on your arm and you feel them, like doop, 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 right? And the idea is you throw a punch and you get a sense of how much of your maximum speed that you're throwing at. And, you know, that's really great for training purposes, right? And so the problem is that, like, you know, the electronics existed, but every time I threw a punch, they would break. So about 13 prototypes in, I was pretty frustrated with life, right? So that got me into wearables. And that, I met my two co-founders while I was at Pratt, Kevin and Young, and we started a company called WearWorks. Now, we didn't start with a Kung Fu suit. That was ridiculously too ambitious for 2015. But my co-founder, Kevin, had an interesting concept. He had a friend who was blind that came to give a talk at the school. And we were at Pratt. We have the largest sculptural garden in New York City. And while he was walking around, he got lost to find the building. And so he was like, think that we could use that thing that you were kind of do Kung Fu with to navigate people. And I was like, wait, navigation is just a simpler form of movement than Kung Fu, right? And so
we built an entirely new way to navigate, one that gets you out of your phone and back into the real world. We are WearWorks. A haptic design company, we build products and experiences that communicate information through touch. Navigation is inherently visual. This means you have to constantly juggle your attention between looking at your phone and seeing what is in front of you. And for the 21 million of us living with a visual impairment, it's even more profound. Navigation takes away the ability to hear what is going on around you, and that is how you keep yourself safe. Introducing Wayband, a wrist-wearable haptic navigation device that delivers turn-by-turn navigation directly to the skin. What this means for you is an intuitive navigation experience that frees your ears and eyes so you can be fully immersed in what's going on around you. At the core of Wayband is our patented haptic corridor. We've built a 360-degree touch-based compass that gives you vibrational feedback based on the direction that you are facing. When you are going the correct way, you feel no feedback. When you turn away from the correct path, you get a slight vibration, and that vibration gets stronger the wronger you are. We've tested with thousands of people, and 90% can figure out the correct way to go in 10 seconds. It's that simple. We began 5 years ago with a question. How can we use touch to deliver information in a more intuitive and less obtrusive way? We began our exploration with navigation. Then in March of 2017, we were approached with the ultimate challenge. Simon Wheatcroft is an athlete who is blind. He dreamed of running solo in the largest marathon in the world. And on November 5th, just 8 months after our initial call, Simon, guided by Wayband, went down in history as the first person who is blind to run the New York City Marathon without sighted assistance. We talked to hundreds of people about their challenges with visual-based navigation. Across the board, it was the same. They wanted to get out of the device and back into their lives. It's easy. Setup is simple. Open the Wayband app and turn on the Wayband device to connect. After that, you input the address, confirm, and put your phone away. Touch is personal. So we built the ability to adjust the feedback level based on your comfort. Researchers and developers use the API to connect Wayband as a peripheral device to explore and create custom haptic experiences, games and applications. Wayband gives you the confidence and the freedom to explore your world without a screen in your way. Go anywhere with Wayband. We built an entirely new way to navigate. One that
Sorry about that, 1 second. So this was Wayband. Just gonna skate really fast and do that again. So this was Wayband. We won several awards for the work. We were recognized. We made the front page of the New York Times Marathon Edition 2017. The piece, the Wayband was put into the Kirkland Design Museum from the Smithsonian and traveled all around the country for over 2 years as part of their Access Plus Ability exhibition. And overall, it was a very positive experience, except I'll tell you about why. But why do we go here? 1 billion people use navigation apps monthly, right? But looking at a phone isn't always safe. It's not practical. And for 285 million people, not possible, right? And so we invented Wayband, which is a wristband, and haptic nav, which is a navigation app that could gently guide a user to their end destination using only vibration. Haptic nav is available in the App Store totally for free, and you can use it without a phone, without a Wayband, just having your phone vibrate. So if you want to try it out now, feel free to take a listen, or feel, shall I say. Now, how does it work? Imagine you're slightly running off and then you get this little buzz to tell you to come back on course. And now the wronger you are, the louder the buzz is, until you're 180 degrees the wrong way and we give you the loudest buzz possible. So we did something simple, right? We took haptics and maps and we just combined them. And we got patents, right? So we came in with this addressable market of focused on the blind and visually impaired, but that was actually the hardest possible group in our dynamic that we felt like we could help to start with, right? And there's a value in starting with very, very difficult challenges, right? Because it sets the baseline to prove the point for everybody else who might have doubts. And so we were planning on tackling that. We raised over $1.5 million, including a National Science Foundation grant and non-dilutive capital, BMW, South by Southwest, our investors, SOSV, EY and Google have also supported, as well as Verizon, right? Now this wasn't a simulation. This was 26.2 miles of grueling real world, and the real world doesn't always work the way you think it should, right? Of all the things that you can plan for a blind person running a marathon, rain was slightly overlooked. And so his device actually failed 15 miles into the race because of rain. Not the Wayband. We had built him another chest device that gave him the distance from other runners in front of him. And that device had failed because of the constant water. And so he couldn't keep his distance any longer. And so our backup runners, you can see my co-founder has his hands up on the side, ran in to kind of shoulder to shoulder him for the last 9 miles of the race. He made it through. It was definitely grueling. He was exhausted, but we got through the day. Failure is an amazing data set if you can look at it in the face and learn what you need to learn from it without the ego. And we learned a lot. Like there's no lab test that could have gave us that data. And so we learned from that. And people gave us, they gave us credibility, not because we did something that was awesome, but more importantly, because we were transparent about how it didn't work and how we planned on doing it again better. And that trust that we built with the community went so far. So far that I'm actually on the board for the Kirkland School for the Blind as part of their How Innovation Center, right? Haptics so open-ended, new beginnings. It's like the rules are written. You can do anything if you just have a vision. So I wanted to build more than products, right? I I wanted to build a pipeline. I was really excited about the industry of haptics. I started to dial really in. I started to kind of like almost evangelize, right? I was like, wow, the digital world is only audio and visual, right? You get your VCR, it was an audio and a video cable. There was no taste, touch, or smell cable that came with it, right? And so, but now at this point, because digital is so much of the information that we consume, we're shoveling a massive amount of the information that we're gathering on a daily basis through just 40% of our human capacity to understand information, and that creates a bottleneck. It also creates inaccessibility, right? We talked about how many people are living with visual impairments, right? We talked about the 460 million people with hearing impairments, right? So problem, everything is audio and visual. My solution, let's make some stuff touch. Right? We have all this skin and no one's using it to do anything. Let's design, because we created the pixel, right? We built the speaker, right? We created the headphone, right? So how do you fill this talent gap, right? Haptics is gonna grow as an industry, so the experts say, and I don't know who these people are, but they know what they're talking about, apparently, right? And so, but what we're not seeing is educational programs growing to match the demand that is expected to grow with haptics. So that is the problem that I saw as a founder in the haptic space. It's like, okay, when I'm a $10 million company, where do I go to hire all my haptic people, right? And so I shifted into haptics and focusing in on education. I was invited by the Kansas City Art Institute to be the Leonard Pryor Fellow for Accessibility, which I took and accepted. I moved to Kansas City for 2 years. And while I was at KCAI, which is a very beautiful campus, I really missed them there, I got to teach a lot. Now, the big thing that got me out of New York into Kansas City was they said that I could teach anything I wanted. And at the time, I was trying to figure out how do I teach haptics to people who don't know the word haptics, who don't know anything about electronics. And so they let me build 2 courses in haptic design. Those are actually my license plates when I was in Missouri. I figured if I was gonna park my car, you might as well learn what haptic means. All right, and so one around haptic design and one around wearables, because wearables is a big part of the haptic conversation. And students, again, most of these people had no background in tech at all, built some ridiculously amazing projects. You see the sleeper mask here, wanted to build it so that when his partner was sleeping, they didn't wake each other up, right? So they had a vibrating sleeping mask. This was a ruler that basically gave you Adobe snaps in real life. So every time you hit the 45 degree, it would start vibrating and let you know. And you can set the angle there and then change it from 45 from that, right? I got to teach the first design students to graduate from their product design program. And I got to teach the freshmen coming in this class I call Superpower Products. I'm really big about taking ideas from fiction because why? They're not patented and they're already market proven. Right, so, and I got to do some artwork. I presented some pieces in a collection. Most of the art was look at, and so I decided to present some work that you could hear. I presented the rap. I also presented the rap in Braille so that you could touch it, right? And so I did this other thing, this solo exhibition. I was starting to move into this world of movement and movement learning. Kung Fu, the suit, the dream never left. I took a 9-year detour focused on blind and visually impaired navigation, and I learned a lot in that space that I could apply. So now I wanted to do something, but I didn't know exactly what. So I created an exhibition that allowed me to explore what that looked like. Basically, I just kind of made a design lab out of a studio and invited the public to come in and just watch me design and contribute whenever they felt like it. It was a 3-month thing. I got a lot of feedback. It was pretty awesome. And then one of the other parts I realized while I was there was a conversation around the narrative of art. Everything is look, but don't touch. As a haptic person, that's really disheartening. Right? And so I started going on blind touch tours. And I realized, like, what if we just made an art exhibition that all the artwork could be touched? And so I did the first art exhibition. I don't know if it was the first, it might be, right? Exhibition at KCAI where every single piece of artwork that's submitted could be touched. In the right-hand corner, you see the Kansas State School for the Blind. I invited them to my opening. I remember this little girl, she's sitting in the front row, she's super tiny, had her little white cane, and she was so cute. And she came up to me and she was like, "Excuse me, what can I touch?" And I was so overjoyed to say, like, you can touch everything. And then, I mean, they put art on their heads. I didn't tell them they could do that, but I didn't tell them they couldn't do that. So rules, we'll establish those later, right? But what we got is we got an experiment where what happens when you take the boundaries off and what you get is deeper engagement with the art. And that is what that is what art is all about, right? It's like, if you can touch it, it's a deeper level of engagement than just looking at it. I was also invited by one of my mentors, Dan Formosa, he is the co-founder of Smart Design, to give an educational piece on this idea of haptic design. We had this conversation on haptic design and how I thought, and he was like, I think you should write that. And I was like, okay. So he invited me to write about it, and I was also invited to be the chair of the Ideas Council, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Sustainability for my work in accessibility, right? I got to do some talks, it was great. Remember that book I talked about, that was our Bible, The Archaeologies of Touch? David Parisi invited me to give a lecture. He's at NYU. And so that was an absolute honor because, I consider the Archaeologies of Touch like one of our Bibles, right? And that led me to create my second startup, the H9 Co. The H stands for haptic, if you don't know. All right. So I want to make a world where haptics are ubiquitous. And what do I mean by ubiquitous? Again, affordable, accessible, and approachable. That approachable part is actually a really key component, because if everything is there and people don't feel comfortable approaching it, no one will touch it. Doesn't matter how easy or how well it's designed or how well it works, right? And so I came into, so now you're wondering, where did the 9 come from? Well, doing a little bit of digging, I came to realize that to get to a ubiquitous world, that we kind of had to do a lot of work, right? Originally, I called them the 9 chasms, but people were dismayed by chasms. So I called them instead the 9 bridges that are not built yet, that need to be built to cross the 9 chasms, right? What are these chasms, right? I'll talk a little bit about them deeply, but there's immersion, responsiveness, and wearability, personalization, accessibility, culture, ethics, standardization, and sustainability. Now, I'm going to burn through these, but these are all on the website, so if you grab one of those links and go to our About section, you can grab the super deep dive into all this content here, right? So first we got the immersion bridge, right? Immersion is not just, oh, can I feel a buzz? It's like, does this feel like I'm driving through a rumbly dirt desert, right? Is that realism there? Now you have sustainability, right? Because once we start making motors to move mass, we have to make mass, and that creates waste potentially. So we need to figure out how we're going to preemptively get ahead of that so we don't end up in the e-waste game, right? The wearability challenge that you saw with my prototypes is still a challenge. Bridging the hard and soft gap is very, very difficult, and we need products that help people do that more easily. Now we have responsiveness. We need latency in the single-digit millisecond range, or the illusion breaks instantly, right? Personalization. My strong might be your weak. My relaxation might be your annoying, right? We need to make sure that, and then we have the whole neurodivergent spectrum for accessibility. We need to make sure that people have access to control the touch that they're receiving, and that there's space in between. Ethics is going to be a massive part of it. Once I have all this touch information about you, it's very personal, right? How do we deal with that? How do we put those guardrails in place ahead of time? Super important. The accessibility piece, right? How do we make sure that everyone has access to the technology? By building for the fringe cases, and if you want the hint to the answer, right? You build for the fringes and things work out for the middle usually pretty well. The standardization bridge, right? We need an MPEG format, right? Everyone can't be designing haptic codexes from scratch. It takes too much time and too much development time, right? And then there's the culture bridge, right? And there's the bridges in America we shake hands, and Paris we kiss, right? In Japan, we bow, right? Touch is dramatically perceived differently across culture, and that matters a lot when you're designing these systems, right? So part of KCAI, I created an internship while I was there, realizing that there was a challenge between the lack of opportunities or lack of art that's available that's new for museums and artists who want to learn how to make accessible artwork, right? By marrying those two together, I created this program called Reimagine Accessibility, where I invited 4 students to take pieces from the Nelson-Atkins Museum in Kansas City and translate them into tactile artifacts that were then donated to the accessibility team as part of the Blind Touch Tours. And so these 4 pieces of work created a precedent that is now an ongoing conversation. I'm actually having conversations with the Brooklyn Museum in New York and some other museums around the world to bring similar models. Anytime you have a design school and a museum that needs accessible art, there's a pairing there. Students get artwork that they can put on their resumes in museums. Designers and schools train the next generation of art designers and artists how to make accessible artwork, and the museum gets the benefit of having both new artwork and a renewed interest into the collection. Right, so how does all this connect? It's a lot going on here, right? I told you, we're doing non-straight paths, right? And so my path forward was, I was practicing capoeira. I was in Kansas City. I love this kid, he's awesome, right? And I get injured again. I mean, I actually just got injured this week, so I was better, so it's funny, but I get injured a lot, right? So I'm injured again, right? And at the moment, I was at a crossroads between, do I go to high performance athletics or do I jump into physical therapy? And injuring myself, I decided to do research, and after a month of research, I realized that I could walk again. Who knew? You just listen to what they tell you, it works. So I became an advocate. I shifted my focus to physical therapy, and now Movement 9, our first product line, is building products for the space of rehab and movement learning. Now, movement is still taught in the way that music used to be listened to before the invention of the phonograph, right? Imagine if you were like Beyonce and it's 1876 and you wanted to like drop an album, right? You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of work. You gotta like go to people's houses, perform the songs, get them to pay you. Right now, you have streaming, she rolls out of bed, bam, digital powers turn, her album into money overnight, right? Distribution, and we all have headphones, right? So how do we give teachers that same ability that Beyonce has, right? But movement is also learned in the same way music was listened to before the invention of the phonograph, right? How do we give the learners the same digital abilities, right? Why am I practicing capoeira? Because I was in New York practicing praying mantis kung fu, and then I moved, and guess what's really hard to find? A northern style praying mantis kung fu teacher. So I did capoeira, right? Then I left, and now what am I doing? I'm doing Japanese kendo, right? And so it's a lot of times you'll get these hyper-localized experiences because that movement isn't available everywhere, right? So, but what if it was? What if you could learn yoga from any yoga teacher anywhere in the world, put directly into your own body, right? Again, so now, starting with the seemingly impossible. We talked about this earlier. Why do we start with the seemingly impossible? Because even if you fail, you land somewhere awesome. You shoot for a little goal and you fail, you don't really, right? But if you shoot for a massive goal and you fail, well, you probably still did more than most of the people who walked into that space ever tried, right? And so my goal is to build the world's largest digital movement library. I want to preserve our collective movement the same way we save our music and our art. I want to preserve our movement, and also I want to be able to learn any movement from anywhere. This is my dream, right? And it's the questions that drive us, right? This has been my question, so I got immediately to work. I'm like, I know what I want to do now. I'm focused. Build. I got some interns, and we started building stuff, and it was awesome. And then I had to stop and think, right? Because this is my second startup now. I have experience, right? And what did I learn from my first experience? My first experience taught me that you don't build high capital systems until you have committed capital or customers who have dedicated money to pay for that. So in other words, I didn't want to build hardware and start just making stuff cool and then hope someone would pay for it this time. I wanted to see if we could build something and get demand first, right? And so when I started to look at what was the challenge, right? This was generated with AI. What was the challenge? The challenge was not how accurate the data that they were getting was, or that was subjective versus objective. That was a challenge, but that wasn't the challenge. The challenge was 2 hours a day of documentation time on top of your workload, like clinicians burning out, quitting the industry at alarming rates, the aging population getting larger, physical therapists quitting, massive gap in talent pools, right? All of a sudden, it was a bigger problem than can we get accurate data around a knee sleeve? And so I started to look at the average clinic is losing almost $37,000 with a 15% average denial rate, right? So that means, and in New York it's 20%. So 1 out of every 5 claims that you submit, you don't get paid for. You did the work, you paid the person, you lost the cost, you just sink it. And 65% of those don't even get resubmitted because people would just rather move on because they don't think that the recovery money is gonna be worth the extra time that they're gonna have to spend to get it. So I started shifting, right? I started building M9 Assurance to assure the revenue of the physical therapy clinics, right? With an AI scribe that has a human verified component because HIPAA compliance and fraud risk are a big thing. Now, what does this have to do with movement and kung fu suits, right? We're going far. What I realized is that if you're going to build a system that's cool, and you don't actually build the entire system to capture all the value around it, what you're basically doing is you're creating a product and giving the value away to the customer or the next company that is going to build the ecosystem. If you look at Apple, they don't really do new stuff, right? What do? They build the ecosystem around it so that when they step into the game, they own it. That's a different category of thinking when you're coming from a business point of view. And I was like, wow, how do we play this, build the whole product game, not just build the product that I think, but build the ecosystem that the product needs to live in so that you're able to extract all the value and provide all the value that you need to the group at the same time, right? You have control over that conversation 100%. So I had to step away from the knee sleeve actually because I realized that this was actually the real problem, but the bigger part is that if I built the knee sleeve, all it would do is give my physical therapist more work because how do they get the data from the knee sleeve into their insurance to get paid? But now, by building this product, they trust me with their revenue, and then I build my product to work with my product, and now I can have the knee sleeve pump data directly into the physical therapy's insurance biller, right? So I want to talk about this idea of inefficiency as career strategy, right? And I was reading this actually this week, right? I was like asking AI, I was like, hey, how do we get warm-blooded people, right? You know, how did warm-blooded become warm-blooded, right? And, I was like, and AI is like, well, because, warm-blooded, birds and mammals have more mitochondria, and so the energy centers of the cells, and basically what they do is they dump 80% of the food that you eat is waste heat. 80%. A reptile is 10 times as efficient as a human. Imagine being able to eat one meal today and not being hungry for 10 times as long, right? On the same amount of energy, right? So we throw away all this, 80% goes into waste heat. Why? So that we can stabilize the environment. Why? Because that gave us space to conquer more territory that our cold-blooded counterparts couldn't. Right? And so this idea of, I am a proponent of efficiency. This was like a philosophical conversation to me when I first saw this. I was like, what? I hate inefficiency, but inefficiency is the reason that we exist and we have the benefits that we have as warm-blooded animals. And so it made me rethink inefficiency. What is inefficiency, right? And so now this is a ridiculous inefficiency of mine that I've been kind of working on the back end. And I want to share, this is the first time I'm sharing this publicly, is I came up with this idea. I want to make a haptic anime, right? Now, I was watching some friends who was watching a cooking anime, and after about 5 episodes, I was waiting for the fight, and it didn't happen. And I was like, hey, when are they gonna start fighting? He was like, no, they don't fight here. They just talk and cook. And I couldn't understand it, I was like, whoa. And then I was like, wow, if you can cook, I can do haptics. And then just like, bam, went into like idea generation mode, right? Spent a few months, worked with a few people, passed some ideas around, generated some stuff with AI, right? And so I'm gonna show you some kind of initial examples of where I'm going with this idea and what the whole purpose of this thing is. So I start off with this idea of haptic anime. Why? Because The Matrix inspired me to build a kung fu suit, right? Back to the Future 2 inspired somebody to build a hoverboard. Can I inspire somebody to want to build like the haptic technology of tomorrow, right? A 12-year-old who's like gonna go to college and like, I'm gonna be a haptic designer, right? Because they know what that is because they were exposed to it, right? Can I build that ecosystem, right? So I took exactly, if you look at the 9 bridges, I took exactly from our 9 bridges framework. I made them these legendary characters that like the character has to interface with to learn the secrets of the haptic ghost net, right? And so there's this idea of this fall of this utopia. These 9 people try to come together and create this utopian experience that makes all humans haptically enabled, and they kind of mess up, as per usual when you have so much hubris. And now things are not equal at all. They're actually totally, one race has enslaved the other, and it's like total calamity, right? And so there's this idea of a protagonist between the resonants who have these innate haptic abilities, gifted. Their whole thing is innate genius, and you have the other side, you have the foundation who are enslaved or suppressed, and their whole thing, they don't have the abilities of haptics, so they build tech to give them haptic abilities. And so their whole thing is earned mastery. And so when we start looking at like some of the schools of the haptic abilities, this is the school of concussives. They're the strongest haptics of the group. They have the write command, which gives them the ability to write haptic commands onto this thing that we call the lattice, right? And now we have on the other side, we have the weavers who have the read command. It's a much more passive command. It doesn't use as much energy. And because the concussives are using the write command, they are more susceptible to this thing called haptic burnout, which is causing them degenerative decay. And each generation, that haptic burnout is getting stronger and stronger, right? Which brings to the protagonist and everything coming together. The strongest generation, they're dying really easily. At the same time, the foundation is being suppressed by this noble lie, and they come together to essentially meet the 9 haptic ghosts and build the 9th bridge, which is a patch to create haptic powers for all of humanity. So how'd you get in this? Saw real life and fiction. Saw The Matrix 1,000 times, saw my future envision. Building a suit to download and learn Kung Fu, that was my entrance. Then we made it a business. Subtract complexity, added and making a difference. The recipe to build an industry that will be valued in trillions. Thank you so much.